Restoration Manifesto. So in a systematic way, and I hope all of us are taking notes, that in a systematic way, we're going to explain patiently now, what is this Afrika Mayibuye Restoration Manifesto? What does it do? One, it tells the history of where do we come from as a people, as a nation. It's a simple thing. It tells the history of where do we come from as a people, as a nation. And that history is inspired, the historicization in the manifesto is inspired by what Marcus Garvey said, that a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. That is what it does. That is number one. Number two, the Restoration Manifesto gives a diagnosis of what is the sickness of society, economically, politically, and socially, of the society that we live in. So a diagnosis is an attempt to identify the diseases that confront the society that we live in. One, it's history. Two, is diagnosis. Three, the Restoration Manifesto deals with the question of what is Afrika Mayibuye Movement? That in simple terms, if they ask you, you are part of this Mayibuye, what is it? You must be able to explain that. And in the definition of what is Afrika Mayibuye Movement, the Restoration Manifesto also gives the core objectives and aims. Core objectives and aims. So core objectives and aims is what do we want to see of this South Africa, and also states the principles of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. Number four, the Restoration Manifesto deals with the motive forces as to, in pursuit of these revolutionary struggles, who stands to gain and who stands to benefit. So when they ask you what is a motive force basically speaks to those who stand to benefit out of a revolution. So when you talk about motive forces of the revolution, you are speaking about those who stand to benefit out of whatever revolutionary task that you are in pursuit of. Number five, so there is aims and objectives in number three. Number four is the motive forces. Number three is what is Afrika Mayibuye Movement, but as part of that, there is core objectives and principles. Number four is the motive forces. Number five, it's the roles and functions of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. So number five explains that what do we seek to do as a collective, and what do we seek to do as individuals. So each and every one of us, when we get to be familiar with that section, we should know what is expected of us. And then number six, the Restoration Manifesto deals with the Afrika Mayibuye Movement's position on immigration as an important issue that has to be dealt with, and an issue which was raised in all the consultation processes and forums that we engaged in across South Africa. So there's a position that is explained of what is Afrika Mayibuye Movement's position on immigration. Number seven deals with the character and manifestations of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. That what is the actual manifestation of the organization itself on the ground? What do people feel it as? We'll talk to that when we get there. Number 8 deals with the ideological character of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. Ideological character, it sounds like a difficult word. Is what is our frame of thoughts? What are the lenses? What telescope do we use to analyze and understand society? It's not a very complex thing to understand. Number 9, the Restoration Manifesto identifies and characterizes who are the strategic and tactical friends here in South Africa. Who do we fight alongside in the struggle for total freedom and emancipation now? Are we still together, comrades? And then, number 10, the Restoration Manifesto deals with the question of who are our friends and who do we fight alongside with in the international space, in the global and international space. Who are the strategic and tactical friends at that level? Number 11, the Restoration Manifesto responds to the question of what is to be done. Politically, economically, organizationally, what is to be done in the immediate. And then number 12 deals with the nature and character of branches as the basic unit of Afrika Mayibuye Movement, the most basic form of organization and the instruments of change in Afrika Mayibuye Movement. What type of branches should we have in driving the revolutionary agenda? And then the last section then deals with what type of leadership do we want in carrying this revolutionary program and agenda towards attainment of total freedom and emancipation now. Now the clarion call before we come to each part of it to then say what each part says, the clarion call of Afrika Mayibuye Movement is total freedom and emancipation now. It's not total freedom and emancipation in our lifetime. We are looking for total freedom and emancipation now. That is the principle, that is the clarion call that is going to drive all of us. And that shapes the nature and character of everything else that all members and structures of Afrika Mayibuye must be involved in. So whenever people come with challenges of water, of collapsed infrastructure, of education, of unemployment, what we think as Afrika Mayibuye Movement is what we do now. We do not plan that, no, don't worry, those things, they take time to resolve. So the idea and thinking that must drive all of us is what do we do manje. So it's total freedom and emancipation manje. That is the clarion call that drives all of us as to what do we do, even on areas where we cannot do anything, but we must have solutions now. There's no tomorrow. Everything else that has to be done is total freedom and emancipation now. That is the clarion call of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. And that is why in the introduction of the Restoration Manifesto, there is a quote by Amilcar Cabral who says that always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, for the things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children now. So that is the clarion call that then deals with where we come from. Now, the first part of the Restoration Manifesto emphasizes what we have just emphasized now, which is to say that this document is the Restoration Manifesto. It is the founding document which gives political, ideological, and organizational compass of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. So a compass is a navigator. So compasses were used before the electronic navigators were there to say that this is the direction that you take. So the compass, the navigator of Afrika Mayibuye Movement is this Restoration Manifesto, which calls for total freedom and emancipation now. Inkululeko ephelele kanye nokukhululwa kwabantu manje. Tuhuluho yao kaofela lituholo hona jwale. Kuntsusheka kohelela sisi. Tlolelo e tlamali tlhabololo jwanong. Tuhuluho ya ho felela le go loga bjwale. Mbofolo yo felelaho na mvelapanda zino. Inkululeko leligcwele nekukhululwa nyalo. Inkululeko engcwele kanye nokukhululwa nyalo. Total freedom and emancipation, no. And then the last part, if I read, you won't believe that I'm saying the correct thing. Because it's in the language, is the Khoi language. And it emphasizes that this Restoration Manifesto is the product of the people. It is the resounding echo of collective wisdom forged in the trenches of shared struggle. A tapestry woven from the threads of communal dreams and unyielding resolve, born not from isolated egos, but from the pulsating heart of the masses who refuse to bow to tyranny. It shuns the vanity of self-absorbed elites, those ivory towers dwellers detached from the blood, death, and sweat of real lives, and instead arises as the unfiltered voice of the oppressed, the blueprint carved by hands hardened from labor and hearts scared by injustice, demanding that Africa is restored to her true guardians. So that is the essence of the introduction. So comrades, we're going to talk to what is highlighted in each and every section of the Restoration Manifesto so that all of us, we have an understanding. Then the next section that starts on page 5 deals with the question of where do we come from as a people, and paints a correct picture that before the arrival of colonial settlers, we were not sleeping on top of trees and under the rocks as the indigenous people of South Africa. We had order, we had organized systems. In the pre-colonial history, there is proper evidence that we were even involved in the extraction of mineral resources and also involved in global trade as well. And we have to emphasize this point because if you go to all the bookstores now, majority of the books that tell the history of South Africa, they start in the year 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck and the colonial settlers arrived in South Africa. So majority of history books that exist about the history of South Africa is not the history of South Africa. It is the history of white people in South Africa. So all the historicization of the history in South Africa is the history of white people in South Africa. So we are retelling it to say that before the arrival of colonial settlers, we had systems, we had governance systems. We knew authority. We were involved in subsistence farming. We were able to generate food. And we could distinguish between wild and domestic animals. That is the reality which we must. And we must never ever believe that we only got to know civilization with the arrival of white colonial settlers. We were a people with order, with systems before the arrival of colonial settlers. And of course, the colonial settlers came. They first tried in the year 1510. So the first attempt to colonize South Africa began in the year 1510 in what got to be known as the Battle of the Salt River Battle. And the first attempt to colonize, to occupy this part we call South Africa today, was done by the Portuguese, because they were the dominant force in the world. So in their global trade from Europe with the Asias, they used to pass through the Cape and use the Cape as a stop station and then proceed to engage in different trade with the Asias. Then there was an attempt by a Portuguese colonial settler called Francisco de Almeida, who tried to colonize South Africa, but he was defeated in a physical war by those that he tried to take the land of. So the first attempt to colonize South Africa didn't start in 1652. It began in the year 1510. So you will see that the Portuguese ultimately succeeded in the colonization of Angola, of Mozambique, because when they were traveling on the coastal lines, they will always try to take over those land parcels. They tried to take South Africa, but they didn't succeed because our forefathers resisted that colonial invasion. And then, of course, in 1652, there was a colonial settlement which began as a stop station of a company called VOC, like the Dutch East Indian Company, which had the full support of the Netherlands government, an army to colonize our country. And when the colonial settlers took our land, there was resistance. Those who had the land fought back to say, you can't take our land, you can't take our animals. But they were defeated because the colonial settlers had superior armaments, they had superior weapons, they had guns, they had bombs. And ourselves were fighting with the spear. That is why in the logos of almost all liberation forces in South Africa, there's a spear as a symbol of resistance against colonial settlement. Are we together, comrades? I don't want to, so that is, so there were many battles in the war against colonial invasion. So you know, in a war, you have different battles that take place in different areas and in different time periods. There were many battles. Some were won by our forefathers, but very few. But the war of colonial invasion, the war to resist colonial invasion, we did not win that war. Our forefathers did not win that war. Those who tried to fight through organized political parties from the early 1900s up to this day, we have still not won the war. We are still a conquered and defeated people by colonial settlers. And how do we know that we are still a conquered and defeated people? We see that because of the landlessness. The land still belongs to the descendants, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the colonial settlers and invaders. Majority of animals are owned and controlled by the descendants of colonial invaders. Almost all our precious and industrial mineral resources and metals are owned and totally controlled by the colonial invaders. We are still slaves in our own land. We are still suppliers of cheap and easily disposable labor to the colonial settlers and their descendants. So we are still a conquered people. So that is what the history part of the Restoration Manifesto deals with. And of course gives recognition of those that fought against colonial invasion, those that fought physically, those that resisted, those that surrendered their bodies were defeated. Those that tried to form political formations to resist colonialism also did not win. And we make mention of the fact that part of the reasons why the colonial settlers defeated us is because there was never a period where they fought us as a combined force. Are we together, comrades? So there was never a time where we were fighting against colonialism as small separated clans and kingdoms. There was never an African or South African army which said, let's resist these people. They fought us separately and then they were able to subjugate us and defeat all of us. And the defeat is still a reality. We are still a conquered people. We can say it whichever way, but materially, we are still under colonial rule. Even the manner in which the economy was designed, it still serves the colonial interest. So if you check the railways, the infrastructure, not only of South Africa, of the entire African continent, all the rail projects move from the areas that have got mineral resources to the ocean to supply the colonial settlers and the colonial masters. There is no rail projects that interconnect all of us so that we can interact amongst ourselves. So the colonial economy is still a lived reality. And we explain that they fought with spears. And at some stage, after the arrival of the first colonial settlers from the Dutch, then the British came in. Then they annexed the whole of South Africa. And in the late 1800s, the Dutch settlers and the British settlers fought amongst themselves. They fought within themselves, like they had something they called the Anglo-Boer War. But it was not just Anglo and Boer warriors. There were a lot of black people who were co-opted on both sides, who were sent as mercenaries to fight the Anglo-Boer War. There are so many black people who died in the Anglo-Boer War fighting the war which has nothing to do with them. And in the year 1902, when the Anglo and the Boers settled, they resolved the war. They said, let us form a white-only government and exclude these blacks. And then they started to write the laws of that country, and then they agreed amongst themselves that this new entity, which they are going to call the Union of South Africa, is going to be under British colonial protection. Are we together, comrades? So that they say that, yes, physically there were lots of casualties from the Boers, and the Dutch seem to be not interested in supporting the Boers. So let's agree that let's form a white-only government, which is going to be under British colonial supervision. That is why the law that established South Africa in the borders that it has now was passed in the year 1909 as the Union of South Africa Act by the British Parliament in England. And then they were merging the two Boer republics, which was Transvaal and the Orange River Colony, with the two British colonies, which was the Cape and the Natal, to form what is called South Africa today. And that was a white-only government that excluded black people from participation, from meaningful participation. And the understanding was that this Union of South Africa is a colonial project of the British Empire. So the head of state of South Africa from 1910, when it was launched, was the King of England. And those that were doing administrative works asoze saphela mandla, asoze saphela mandla, asoze saphela mandla, Mayibuye. Now, thank you very much. It was a necessary break, comrades, that we had to take. We're still explaining the fact that South Africa was established by an act of parliament passed in the British Parliament as the Union of South Africa Act. That act is still, you can search for it in the internet, the Union of South Africa Act, which established South Africa in the... Now there's interesting things that happened before the passing of the Union of South Africa Act. That when the Boers and the English were fighting amongst themselves, they had a national convention, like a national conference of men only, 33 men, to say, how do we resolve this question? And then they said, let us merge these 4 provinces into one country called the Union of South Africa. The head of state will be the British Empire. Whoever is a king or queen there will be the head of state of the Union of South Africa. And then the others will be prime ministers. And then because there were 4 provinces, they then said they can't have one capital city. They must instead have 3 capital cities. And then the other province will be prioritized in terms of the infrastructure which it needed to be prioritized that time. As a result of that colonial settlement, the Transvaal was given the administrative capital city in Pretoria. So it's a colonial agreement that Pretoria became the capital city of South Africa administratively. And then the legislative capital of South Africa became Cape Town on behalf of the Cape Colony. And then Bloemfontein became the judicial capital on behalf of the Orange River Colony. And then the Natal was given a project which they had to finish as part of the priority programs that were being engaged in at that time. So the fact that 1994 did not change that colonial agreement, it's confirmation that was still a colonial project. Because it's senseless to have 3 capital cities. It's politically and administratively burdensome to have legislators at the far end of South Africa. And then you say you have got a democracy which must involve everyone in terms of participation. It's impossible now, if there's public submissions that have to be made in Parliament, for many parts of South Africa to get to the Cape. But if there was logic, a capital city ideally should be at the center of the country, so that everyone else is able to come there. But we are living under a colonial agreement of the Anglo-Boer arrangement. So the reason why the capital seat and the head of state operates from the union buildings, the union that is the Union of South Africa as in the Union of South Africa Act. So we are still in that. Then we narrate the history of resistance against the Union of South Africa. The first attempt, of course, was these traditional leaders and the black middle class, which said, let us found one organization to resist the colonial union of South Africa. So before the 1912 January 8 formation of the South African Natives National Congress, there were congresses in other parts of South Africa. In the Orange River Colony, there was an organization of the Free State Congress led by Mapikela. In the Transvaal, there was a Congress led by Sifako Mahato. In the Natal, there was a Congress led by John Langalibalele Dube. Then they started negotiations to then found the South African Natives National Congress in Bloemfontein, because Bloemfontein is central. So Bloemfontein is the most central city in South Africa. So logically, whoever was coming from whichever part of this South Africa, they then met in Bloemfontein to found the South African Natives National Congress on the 8th of January 1912, which was renamed the African National Congress in 1923. Two important things to highlight about the formation of the South African Natives National Congress. It did not have fundamental objections to the Union of South Africa Act. It actually did not. So the ANC at formation did not object to the Union of South Africa, and including the fact that it was going to be under British rule. They were fighting for inclusion of some of the black people within the Union of South Africa. And this is not fiction, it's things that you can read in their foundational documents. They honored and respected the British royalty. Even when they sent delegations to England to ask for inclusion into the Union of South Africa, they will say, we are under your leadership, O King, we worship you. I'm fine. So at formation, so you must go and retrieve the contents of the ANC petitions to the British royalty. They were saying, no, just accommodate the educated black middle class and those that have got property. Don't include everyone, but some of us we speak like you, we sound like you. Maybe the ANC has achieved what it was founded for. Because it was never about the total liberation of everyone. Of course, with time, the nature and form of the struggle changed. So we then give, so comrades will explain that in the part of the history section that the struggle for our freedom and emancipation is like a relay race. So you know a relay race is what those young men from Botswana did in Japan in the World Championship. So the first one runs and hands over the baton to the next one. Then they take the baton to go to give to the other one. And then the last one runs towards the finish line. In the struggle for freedom, we take it like that we are not the originators of the struggle for total freedom and emancipation. We're taking the batons from those that fought with spears and were defeated. We're taking the batons from those that formed political parties. We're taking the baton from the generation of freedom in our lifetime. Now, comrades, since formation, the ANC was conservative and was always, by the way, even their conferences were opened by representatives of the colonial government. That no, we hear you about the Christ we have. We are aware that you went to Britain. There are some rules that we are going to. We wish you well in your conference, but you must tell us what are your resolutions. That is what used to happen. But then the turning point in the struggle methods began with the generation that defined itself as the freedom in our lifetime generation of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, of Mxolisi Majumbuzi, of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, of A.P. Mda, of Walter Sisulu. That generation said that this method of fighting in respect and in fear of the colonial government must come to an end. Let's engage in confrontational battle of defiance first. Let's defy the colonial laws. Let's adopt a perspective that is going to articulate our vision and aims as to what type of society do we want to build in South Africa. That is why on the 26th of June, 1955, the Freedom Charter was adopted, which said that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and which also said that no government can claim authority over the people unless if it is based on the will of all the people. That was a radical departure. So and it also said that the mineral wealth beneath the soil, the banks and monopoly industries shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole. And in that time, that was too radical to say, are you saying that we must all vote? That is too radical. That is why the Freedom Charter was banned, and everyone else who associated with the Freedom Charter was considered to be a terrorist. So to have a copy of the Freedom Charter was, you are a terrorist automatically. To associate with the aims and objectives of the Freedom Charter meant terrorism. And because of the Freedom Charter, everyone who associated with the Freedom Charter were arrested in what became known as the treason trial. So it was treasonous to associate with the Freedom Charter. Are we still together, comrades? And then the Freedom Charter led to the banning of all the liberation forces. And then it led to the formation of Umkhonto weSizwe, the army. Umkhonto weSizwe, the army. That is as an armed resistance against apartheid. So we're explaining this relay race of who fought and what happened. But an interesting development as well, which the historicization or the history books, even of the ANC, conveniently suppresses, is the role that was played by the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania and Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Because after the adoption of the Freedom Charter, there is a section of the freedom in our lifetime generation that said we cannot associate with this thing that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. South Africa belongs to us black people only. That is what the Pan-Africanist component said. And then they founded the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania in Soweto in 1959. And in 1960, then they led the anti-pass defiance campaign, which was in Sharpeville and in other parts of South Africa. A lot of people were killed because of that struggle that was single-handedly inspired and led by Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. And that changed the course of history in South Africa. That changed the course of history in South Africa. It led to the banning of political parties. It led to the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the army. And when all the liberation forces were suppressed, the voices that rose came from the Black Consciousness Movement with the formation of the South African Students' Organization in 1968. So when there was a vacuum of liberation politics in South Africa, when the parties were banned, leaders exiled, imprisoned, there rose a young revolutionary called Stephen Bantu Biko to found the South African Student Organization. And from campuses, the Black Consciousness Movement got to influence the whole of society in the struggle against apartheid and colonialism. Almost everyone who joined politics and participated in politics from 1968 in the early 70s, almost all of them were organized under the Black Consciousness Movement. So that includes Halima Motlanthe, it includes Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Patrick Lecourt, all of those people who joined during that period. We later on got to join the ANC, but they were first organized under the Black Consciousness Movement. The Black Consciousness Movement founded an organization called the Black People's Convention in Maritzburg in 1972 and elected President Winfred Khwari from Tabanchu. From Tabanchu, Winfred Khwari. Actually, when we spoke about Winfred Khwari, the founding president of Dr. Nuz, when we spoke about Winfred Khwari, the first president of BPC, one of the family members reached out to say, it's the first time they hear someone speak about the first president of the BPC publicly. And that conference of the BPC then designated Stephen Bantu Biko as the lifetime honorary president of the BPC. But the most important thing that took place there was the adoption of Black community programs. So the BPC says, yes, we are a political party who are fighting against apartheid, but what do we do now? Then they adopted Black community programs on health care, on the economy, on creation of jobs now, on education. So if you go to King Williamstown, there is still a Zanempilo clinic, which was founded by the BCP programs, the Black community programs, which were under the Black Consciousness Movement. And of course, the Black Consciousness Movement inspired the June 16 uprising in Soweto to resist the imposition of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction. The June 16 uprising, which was condemned by the ANC, by the way. So the official statement of the ANC after the June 16 uprising was that these kids are reckless. Why do they want to protest like that? They are reckless. But June 16, 1976 got to organize a lot of young people all over South Africa. And it got the apartheid ruling class to reconsider apartheid as a method of capitalist exploitation. June 16, 1976, got the ruling class to reconsider apartheid as an instrument of capitalist exploitation and amassing of resources. That is why after June 16, the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts constituted an organization called the Urban Foundation, which was beginning to discuss how do we involve black people in future South Africa. So if you check who were the employees and the people who associated with the Urban Foundation, they include Tanto the first beneficiary of BEE, Tanto Montlan, but they also included the current president of the ANC. So the Urban Foundation of the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts are the ones who funded the current president of the ANC to buy a house and to buy a car. That time in the 1970s. It's in books which he has signed. So when kids were being harassed by apartheid, he was applying for loans from the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts, and hope not being with them in terms of what got to happen. And we know, comrades, that the escalation of mass protest and everything has led to CODESA, which was the Convention for a Democratic South Africa to negotiate the transition. But in the part of the history, in the section which we're talking to here in the Restoration Manifesto, we acknowledge the role that was played by the workers. We acknowledge the role that was played by women in the anti-pass campaign in 1956. We acknowledge the role that was played by the churches, that as part of the colonial project was an attempt to make black people see God through white people or through whiteness. But we had forces that said we can't associate with that. And that, of course, was illustrated by the formation of the Nazareth Baptist Church in 1910, the formation of the Zion Christian Church in 1924. But earlier there were Ethiopian churches that were founded by Mangena Mukoni in 1892. The formation of the International Pentecost Holiness Church in 1962. The formation of the Bantu Methodist Church in 1933, which got to organize majority of the people, because colonialism included the fact that people must see God through white people or through whiteness. And there was resistance from amongst our people. And then, of course, I did explain 1976 escalated negotiations, and then the white capitalist system approached the ANC in exile to say, if we were to give you government, what are you going to do with it? And the ANC says, no, we're going to continue with whatever was happening there. Then they said, on that condition, we will give you government. Actually, in the year 1987, one of the senior ideologues of the Oppenheimers, Clem Santa, said that at the end of the day, negotiations should work, rhetoric must be dropped, and business must continue as usual. That is how the ANC went to CODESA. Even when F.W. de Klerk released Nelson Mandela in the speech in 1990, and other political prisoners, and also unbanning of other political parties, he said in his speech that we are going to negotiate on the foundation that capitalism is going to continue. Free enterprise will continue unabated, unchallenged. In the contents of the speech. So the manner in which this transition happened was on conditions and foundation laid by the oppressors. That is why we have not won our freedom totally. We went to negotiate a battle that did not belong to us. So that is basically what and then of course, CODESA happened. What CODESA did was to compromise the liberation ideals of total freedom. They said, we're going to take political power, but we'll leave economic power in your hands. Even that political power, we don't want all of it. We just want part of the political power. Otherwise, yourselves, you must continue to work with us here so that you can teach us how to run government. The sunset clauses meant exactly that. That the ANC was babysitted by the apartheid government from 1994 when it took government onwards. And once they realized that this baby has grown according to the shape that we wanted, they said you can go ahead and do it by yourselves because you're doing it correctly. That is basically what happened with the transition of South Africa. But in CODESA as well, something that is not mentioned is that the ANC's approach to traditional and royal leadership was that it must be either destroyed or subjugated to civilian, non-hereditary rule. That was the approach of the ANC because the characterization of traditional leaders in all ANC documents was that traditional leaders are collaborators of apartheid. That is why when they came with Municipal Systems and Structures Act, they redemarcated South Africa differently. So you find villages that are cut into half. One part of the village belongs to this municipality and the other one belongs to the other municipality. One part of the village belongs to this ward, the other one to the other ward, and then the wards are given 3-4 village, the ward councillors, with utmost power over councillors. And then traditional leadership institutions turned into tokens. It was not a mistake, it was a decision. So it was a decision that is why even government planning, when they deal with IDP, it's ward-based, not village-based. And you find in a ward there is 5 villages. Then they go to one village and then they say, what do you want? They're fine. We have covered Ward 2. And they have not spoken to other. That is why villages are still trapped in a perennial and persistent levels of underdevelopment and destruction of the basic infrastructure that existed before. Because that is what got to happen. And of course, 1996, the ANC passed a policy called Growth and Employment and Redistribution Strategy called GEAR, which privatized state-owned companies and gave more and more economic power to white people. And since the ANC took power in 1994 this way, you can see that nothing was done in an excellent and impressive way. The education system is not perfect. The healthcare system is nowhere close to adequate. Joblessness is worse than what it was under apartheid. The few industries that used to exist in the rural areas, all of them have closed down. Public infrastructure is not maintained. The municipalities, or the so-called municipalities that they've created, are all dysfunctional. And that is what brings us to the next section of the Restoration Manifesto, the diagnosis of what is the problem with South Africa. And these come from the observations that came from the people. Now, comrades, we highlight that there is 100 issues that are identified there. So the section asks the question, why Afrika Mayibuye Movement exists as a political party and movement. And then it says the diagnosis of the problems. And it says that the primary reason and purpose why Afrika Mayibuye Movement exists is because a substantial number of the people of South Africa, in page 27, said it should exist as a movement to address the multiple crises confronting society. So that is the primary reason. Then there's 100 reasons. We say that even if it was one of those reasons, there was basis and foundation to could form an alternate movement. And the reasons start by the fact that our people are still landless. Just land only can form the reason why you should constitute a different movement. Landlessness, joblessness, highest inequality in the world. White people are getting richer, the colonial settlers are getting richer, and our people are getting poorer. Access to natural resources. We make a point that why is it that the extraction of mineral resources is reserved to multinational large companies only? Why are we not allowing artisanal and small-scale mining in South Africa? And in a safe environment, where we say that for this piece of land, you can extract chrome, you can extract gold, and have a livelihood out of it. An example is given. Do you know, in Emalahleni, there was a case that they were dealing with of a member of the community who was arrested for taking a wheelbarrow of coal in Emalahleni, coal, whilst long trains and wagons take our coal to the ocean every day. Tons, thousands of tons, millions of tons are taken every day. But our people are not given access to the basic resources which are supposed to define our riches. The levels of crime, gender-based violence, education system, healthcare infrastructure, food insecurity, undermining of royal and traditional leadership, marginalization and mistreatment of people with disabilities, super exploitation of workers, a national debt which is not manageable, that government continues to borrow money which they are unable to pay back, and that will be a burden to future generations. 100 reasons on why we have to found a different movement. The ANC was given 30 years to become an alternative, and it's not. It's worsening the problems of our people. And an objective political assessment and analysis that we have made, all of us, is that in the space where the ANC has failed, who else is supposed to come with durable solutions? We have got two larger black political parties in South Africa. Are they an alternative to South Africa? No. Because the other political parties, one is Mkhonto Sizwe. And Mkhonto Sizwe is not an alternative to the developmental challenges of South Africa. The other one is the economic freedom fighters. The economic freedom fighters is not an alternative to the developmental challenges of South Africa. To this crisis that we have identified then. They both lack collective and individual capacity and willingness and the necessary fortitude to could fight the crisis that confront South African society. And comrades, there is nothing wrong with giving political characterization of all the role players in society. We are not insulting anyone, but we must be honest enough to say that, but by your habits, by your culture, by your mannerisms, you are unable to fulfill the following responsibilities. And that is the truth that must be told. We are not fighting anyone. It's a political characterization of the forces that otherwise were supposed to bring about change, and they are unable to do so. Whenever they come to contact with resources that are meant for the people, they use those resources for self-enrichment. That is a fact. And we cannot have that. Now, what then becomes the Afrika Mayibuye Movement? Afrika Mayibuye Movement is a people's movement for total freedom and emancipation now. It's fighting for total freedom and emancipation now. One, this is the simplest part. It fights for total political freedom. It fights for total economic freedom. It fights for total cultural freedom and decolonization now. It also fights to build a developmental state, a capable developmental state, but it also wants to be and is a caring and responsive political organization. That can be difficult, and as leaders, we must be able to say, without even reference, that, look, the political power that is in the hands of black people is incomplete. We are fighting for total political power, for total economic power. We are fighting to build a democratic, developmental, capable state. We are fighting for total cultural emancipation and decolonization. We also are a caring organization because we understand our people as human beings, not as voters. We are not an electoral platform. We are not an electoral platform. We are looking at what do we do with the solutions of society now. That is what defines the movement in terms of the issues that are there. And it explains what a developmental state is. It's not a difficult thing to understand. And then The core objectives, therefore, becomes one that Afrika Mayibuye Movement exists to realize the following: equal distribution of land to all the people, reallocating farms, urban plots, and communal areas so that each and every family has got access to decent housing, farming, and livelihood without barriers. Equal distribution and access to all natural resources and wealth, including mineral and marine resources, increasing state ownership and participation in mining for public benefit, and sharing profits from diamonds, coal, fish stocks, and oceans equally amongst all the citizens. The other objective is full industrialization and ability to produce all the goods and services for domestic and global consumption. Building factories to manufacture clothing like shirts and shoes, electronics such as phones and computers, vehicles including cars and buses, food products from canned goods to beverages, construction materials like bricks and steel, agricultural tools such as tractors and implements, and services ranging from banking to tourism, creating self-reliance and export strength. That we are also aiming to achieve full and holistic decolonial education and training for all the people of South Africa, where no one must exit secondary education without a tangible skill. That point is very important, comrades. It's part of the, when we had the consultation with the Nkosi Abatetwa in Mandane, in Ilambe district in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the veterans there spoke eloquently to say, why do we have an education system for 12 years or more sometimes? And whoever leaves that education system does not know how to do anything. What kind of education? Well, at the age of 19 or 20 or 21, you have been you can't be involved. You don't know how to do agriculture meaningfully, to plow plants. You can't do plumbing, you can't repair a light bulb. You can't do anything, you can't play any musical instrument because music is an economy as well. And that is why as Afrika Mayibuye Movement, we should advocate for and implement an education system that is going to skill our people from secondary school levels. Where when you exit secondary school, there is something that you can do for self-sustenance and as a contribution to society as a whole. Not this education system where a person exits grade 12 but doesn't know how to do anything. But they can tell you all the body parts of a locust in terms of and how that is relevant to society, we still have to be explained to. I think someone must still tell us what was the reason of the butterfly. Why were we taught about butterflies and locusts at school? And part of the objectives, comrades, is full investment and utilization of technology to improve our lives, agrarian reform, full employment, that we are going to create jobs for everyone, including those that are above the age of 35. Because that is what the people said to us during the consultations. They said jobs must not just be for those who are below the age of 35. It must be for everyone. And there must be proper paying jobs. That is what Afrika Mayibuye Movement exists to realize. And what are the principles that guide all of us? We're guided by the principle of Ubuntu, the principle of honesty and respect, that we must be respectful in all our engagements. In all our deliberations, we must be respectful. We are not going to insult anyone. And no leader of Mayibuye is going to throw insults on our behalf. We will engage robustly. We can't tell lies as an organization. The other principle is sound and superior alternatives. We must always offer practical and innovative solutions. The other principle that guides all of us is collective prosperity. By the way, you have got political leaders, even veterans, who say that there must be others who are rich first, the rest we'll see later. There is one who wrote an article, he used to be head of state, he said, no, let's accept that we can't be rich, all of us, let us allow others to be rich first. He wrote an article about the Tawambeki. We can't associate with that. We are for collective prosperity. The other principle that drives all of us is black economic solidarity. Black economic solidarity meaning that let's support each other as black people. We spend majority of our money giving to other people, particularly to Caucasians and descendants of colonial settlers who take our resources every day. The other principle is women economic empowerment, purposefully doing so. The other principle is recognition and respect for religious and faith leaders. The other principle is recognition and respect for royal leadership. The other principle is progressive Pan-Africanism. The other principle is strong opposition to corruption and wrongdoing. The other principle is anti-imperialism. That by the nature of our existence, we are driven by progressive internationalism. That is why in our logo we have got the red star. The red star in the logo of Afrika Mayibuye Movement represents progressive internationalism. So, even if the only thing that you are wearing is the red star, progressive forces in the world will know that you represent progressive internationalism. So the 5 spikes in the star represents the 5 continents. And this is the star that was used by Vladimir Lenin, by Che Guevara, by Thomas Sankara, by Fidel Castro, by all the revolutionaries. Just the star already communicates a message that we are together with the progressive internationalists of the world. You will know, comrades, when we deploy you in parliament and then we take you to international bodies in the future, that naturally forces, progressive forces, will drift your direction once they see you with the red star. That is what we represent as Afrika Mayibuye Movement. And the next section deals with the motive forces. Who are the motive forces? Who stands to benefit is the people of South Africa. The people of South Africa are the primary motive force in the struggle for total freedom and emancipation now. How do you gauge that? As a leader, as a member, as an activist, as a deployee of Afrika Mayibuye Movement, whenever you participate in a political discussion that is about to pass a budget or a policy, or it's about anything, the question you must ask and be able to establish is how are the people going to benefit out of this thing? The reason why that is important is because the other political parties and individuals, whenever there's a project, they ask the question of how is business going to benefit out of this? And how do we make money out of this? How do we eat out of this? Now, as revolutionary activists of Mayibuye, we ask, how do the people benefit out of this? And once we are satisfied that the people are going to benefit out of it, then it's a program that we can associate with. So the primary motive force is the people, those that do not own the means of production. Afrika Mayibuye Movement is not an instrument in the hands of the capitalist class. We are not a committee that manages the common affairs of the ruling class. That is what the Restoration Manifesto says. In terms of all of those issues. And what does Afrika Mayibuye Movement seeks to do? The functions and rules. So we have already defined the aims and objectives. So aims and objectives is what you want to see society like at the end. And then the functions and roles is what you do towards the end. Are we together, comrades? So in the functions and roles, part of the functions and roles includes the attainment of political power. Getting political power in Afrika Mayibuye Movement is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have a society where we live in harmony, in peace, in collective prosperity, all of us. And for now, we get to that through political power. But political power is not the end goal. Are we together, comrades? There are political formations and individuals who think that getting political power is the ultimate objective. To us, political power is the means to the end, is not the end. And that we must understand, all of us. Someone says when we were discussing in the officials that if these objectives that we have of full employment, of full industrialization, of no crime, of collective full prosperity, if all of those objectives could be achieved through a church, we're going to found a church and support a church. If we're going to achieve that through an NGO, we're going to take that route. But now the objective can, we believe for now, political power, but not as the end, but as the means towards the end. In terms of, and that is how you must understand all these issues. If you think every day that all you are looking for is political power and the rest shall follow, you are going to neglect the immediate interest of the people. You will think, no, wait for us to go into political power. Whenever people come with problems of what, you will say, no, leadership, don't worry, when we get into office in 26, we'll resolve your problems. What if you don't get into power? It means the problems of our people will never be resolved. So that is what we need to understand. And then, of course, the functions and roles include the fact that we must organize our people, mobilize and organize our people behind the vision for total freedom and emancipation. That we must systematically respond to multidimensional poverty. That we must respond to the immediate needs of our people. And of course, we must mobilize and organize our people to contest and win elections. And we must integrate traditional and royal leadership into meaningful governance and society. All those objectives are there, all of us and everyone else who reads that, you will realize that you will have clarity of what role is expected of you as a member, as a leader of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. Now, the second section that comes deals with the immigration question. And it says, Afrika Mayibuye Movement does not support undocumented immigration. This position stems from a deep understanding of the complexities facing our continent and a commitment to building a united Africa where every citizen thrives within structured legal frameworks. Undocumented immigration poses significant challenges that undermine national sovereignty, economic stability, and social cohesion. And then there is reasons that are outlined as to why we are opposed to undocumented migration. But the Restoration Manifesto also says that in opposing undocumented immigration, Afrika Mayibuye Movement will never associate with those who deny other people access to basic human needs. Such actions are profoundly inhuman, barbaric, and betrayal of our African ethos and Ubuntu. To withhold food, shelter, and medical care or dignity from any human being, regardless of origin, is an abomination that revives the cruelties of apartheid and colonialism, where people were treated as disposable. The other position that deals with the immigration question is that there must be protection of key economic sectors that must be reserved exclusively for the people of South Africa to promote economic empowerment and to reduce foreign dominance. And that this includes the spaza shops, the building material supply and hardware, the private security sector, and all other sectors that our people can meaningfully participate in. And the section also mentions the correct fact that there is a rising number of Caucasian or white immigrants that are coming into South Africa with the sole purpose of outnumbering the indigenous people in places like the Western Cape for electoral purposes. That in opposing undocumented immigration, we must not narrowly want to oppose the migration of black people only. There's a lot of Caucasian immigrants into South Africa who are coming to our country for political purposes, and that must be rejected. So that is the position, and it's easier for all of us to explain it in the manner that it is. The second section deals with the character and manifestations of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. What does that section do? It basically says that a movement or a political organization has got one character and nature, but multiple manifestations. And the manifestations of Afrika Mayibuye Movement are explained that it is a liberation movement. That is one. So let's explain it maybe differently. That Archbishop Zondo is an archbishop, a leader of a church. To some people he's a brother, to some he's an uncle, to some he's a husband, to some he is the father, to some he's a neighbor, like different things. This liberation movement will manifest itself differently to different people. And what do we say should be the different manifestation to different sectors of society? There must be a section of society that says the only reliable liberation movement fighting for total emancipation in South Africa and the African continent is Afrika Mayibuye Movement. That is one. Two, there must be people who come into contact with Afrika Mayibuye as a true leader of a responsible, responsive, and effective government. So those who are going to be staying under municipalities that are under Mayibuye government must say that we are from Afrika Mayibuye territory, everything else runs smoothly there. There must be those who come to contact with Afrika Mayibuye as a thought leader in ideological, political, and policy discussions, offering superior perspectives and solutions. There must be those whose relationship with Afrika Mayibuye Movement is as a champion of women's emancipation and equality. So Dr. Nozi, at the forefront of the women's struggles and programs, those that interact with the women's movement of Mayibuye must be like, this is the most reliable organization in championing women's interests and aspirations. Also, as a champion of youth development and inclusion care, in the youth activism, young people must realize that this is the most dependable instrument for youth activism. Must also be the most dependable and powerful champion of students' interest and all interest in education. It must be seen as a true champion for the full recognition of traditional and royal leaders. All royal leaders in South Africa must express a sigh that finally we've got our own movement that speaks our own interests and aspirations. And this does not mean that we limit our work in everything else that we do. We excel with everything. Must also be manifested as a true champion of religious freedom and equality. That religious institution must say, finally, here is a movement that listens to and understands our aspirations and interests as the religious sector. And that is how we should manifest. So every one of us must conduct our work with true excellence in everything. So those are the manifestations of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. The next section deals with the ideological character. The summary of what is the ideological character of Afrika Mayibuye Movement is in paragraph 155, which says, the Afrika Mayibuye Movement is driven by scientific socialism, a framework that analyzes society through materialist lenses to achieve equitable redistribution of resources and power. And in application of scientific socialism, Afrika Mayibuye acknowledges the unique circumstances and characteristics here in South Africa. One is a large proportion of the religious community whose religious beliefs and systems must not be delegitimized. Because there are mistakes, comrades, historically, that are made by those who associate with scientific socialism to want to destroy religious institutions and faiths. The Communist Party of China underwent a very terrible period of the Cultural Revolution. And they had to convene a special conference in the 80s to revise and regret the mistakes of the past, which included the senseless destruction of religious institutions. And we can't fall into the same trap as far much more advanced revolutionaries scientific socialists, we have got the benefit of history as to what was done wrongly before. The other recognition that is given is the existence of traditional and hereditary leadership in South Africa. The other recognition that is given is the combination of the class, race, and gender in the dynamics of South African society and politics. We will, and this might sound very complicated. It's not. We will, when we intensify on political education, we'll realize the simplicity of what this means. Because all of us in Afrika Mayibuye Movement are going to have the same levels of political and ideological comprehension and understanding. It might seem like it's not possible now, but with persistent work and proper ideological training, all of us are going to have a correct and proper understanding as to how we interpret and define the past, the present, and the future as to how we move forward. And then the next section deals with who are our friends here in South Africa. That our friends is the people of South Africa, the working class and the poor, the traditional leadership, religious organizations and individuals, civic organizations, civil society organizations. And there is a section that says potential strategic allies and alliances. Potential. It says all predominantly black political parties except those funded by white capitalist establishment represent potential allies. Now, comrades, this is very important to understand. In the transition period, particularly from 1990 to 1994, despite the mischaracterization of traditional leaders as collaborators of apartheid, the ANC had also characterized black political parties as enemy forces. And what that led to? It led to massive black-on-black violence. They say South Africa experienced a peaceful transition. It did not. Because more than 20,000 black lives were lost due to political violence during that time. Of course, there was a third force which was sponsoring part of the opponents there. But a political mischaracterization of other political parties as enemy forces was a historical mistake which we must never make ourselves. Despite the failure and the directionlessness, despite the massive weaknesses and hopelessness of the ANC, we can't and we should not characterize it as an enemy force. The same with MKEFF. If you do that, the only thing you do to enemy forces is to eliminate. And that is not our intention. If anything, we want to win them over to our direction of how we interpret revolutionary struggles and how the future must be handled. And that is exactly what we are going to do. So part of the people who are going to win over are those that associate with those parties. And this is very important to understand because on the ground, you will find comrades say, no, we want to expel the chairperson, the deputy chairperson, because the deputy chairperson was seen working with an ANC council, an enemy. that no, this secretary is not reliable. There are even neighbors with the ANC council. Neighbors, they stay together. Attended the funeral. And by the way, comrades, what I'm saying happens in other political organizations. It happens in other political organizations where they say, no, this is an enemy force because it's a neighbor of a councillor of the ANC. Where they say even that, no, the wife is employed by the municipality. How can you trust such a person? That is not going to be our politics, must never be the politics of Afrika Mayibuye Movement. And that is what all of us must appreciate in terms of, if anything, we exist to win over, because in any way, those organizations, all of them, are going to disappear naturally. The ANC is going, even if we are there or not there, the ANC is gone. The less said about the others, the better, because that is, we don't want to talk about. And then globally, who are our friends? Globally, the primary friends, those that we defined with everything, is the alliance of Sahel states of Mali, of Niger, and Burkina Faso. Those we defined with everything. So you don't get excited as a member of Mayibuye and then you say, yeah, but Captain Traore is a dictator. He's not a dictator, he's a revolutionary leader. And we will defend with everything. Those are our primary friends. All progressive African countries that do not support neoliberalism are our friends. All the African countries in the diaspora are our friends. Haiti is our friend. Bahamas is our friend. Trinidad and Tobago is our friend. Jamaica is our friend. So those are the countries that we associate with. The People's Republic of China is our friend. The Progressive People's Republic of China is our friend. And many people think that China's friendship with the African continent only began in the recent past. In the 1970s, without demanding any cent from the African continent, the People's Republic of China was able to build a 1,860 kilometers rail project from Zambia to Tanzania, because the nearest port which Zambia could access was the one in Tanzania, as the only liberated zones in that period. Zimbabwe was still under colonial rule. South Africa was still under colonial rule. Mozambique was still under colonial rule, but the Chinese built a rail project, 1,800 kilometers, called the Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority, TAZARA. It's still in existence. With their own resources, lives of the Chinese people were lost, contributing to the development of the African economy. Even the type of infrastructure that is being built now by the Chinese is not similar to the colonial infrastructure of taking minerals to the ocean. It interconnects the African continent for increased intra-African trade. So the People's Republic of China is our friend. The Russian Federation is our friend and strategic friend. Cuba is our friend. Cuba at any given point has voluntarily trained a lot of our medical practitioners in primary health care. In all the 11 medical schools in Cuba, you will find South African students. we have got a deeper appreciation of primary health care and how it should be approached. Palestine and the people of Palestine who are facing genocide are our friends. We are not friends of Israel. And we know that there is genocide in Palestine done by the apartheid, racist, Zionist state of Israel. We are not speaking in forked tongue about that. And we associate with those that said now in the UN General Assembly that there has to be a defense mechanism to defend the people of Palestine against Israel. There has to be a defense mechanism that all of us should associate with. The colonized people of Western Sahara are our friend. We associate with the politics of Polisario Front. The people of Algeria, which is supporting Polisario Front, is our friend. The people of Belarus are our friends. The people of Indonesia, you must listen to the current president of Indonesia. He was speaking yesterday in the UN General Assembly. Very clear, is our friend. All the countries that are in BRICS are our friends. And all the countries in South America are our friends. And all the Arab nations that are autonomously developing outside of imperialist control are our friends. And all the left-leaning and Marxist formations and organizations all over the world, they are our friends. Tactically, we can align with the Scandinavian countries and the countries that were never involved in colonial occupation and oppression. And our opponents in the world is all the erstwhile colonial forces and those that are still involved in neocolonialism. The next section, comrades, is dealing with the section on what is to be done. It gives programmatic issues that have to be attended to in the immediate. One is the National Convention, which we spoke about in the beginning, to found officially an organization which would have been enriched by the perspectives of everyone. Two is the establishment of Afrika Mayibuye Movement in all provinces with capable leadership that represents all sectors and interests. Also, we have to establish ourselves in all the regional structures, in all the zones and sub-regions of metropolitan municipalities and all the 205 local municipalities in South Africa, meaning that there must be a viable leadership of Afrika Mayibuye Movement in all the municipalities of Mkanyakude, from Mhlabealingana, Jozini, Mtubatuba, and Big Five Hlabisa, in all the 5 sub-regions of Zululand, of Edumbe, Ulundi, Nongoma, Abakulus, Ulundi, and Pongola. In all the municipalities in Ilembe of Mandeni, of Ndwendwe, of Mapumulo, and Kwadukuza. In all the municipalities in Vembe, Musina, there must be a strong structure of Mayibuye, Collins Chabane in Makado, in Tulamela. In all the 10 zones of Cape Metro, in all the sub-regions in Fezile Dabi, of Mafube, of Metsimahulu, of Mwate, of Mokaka. And everywhere, comrades, we should have meaningful presence. And what should also distinguish us, let's pay attention to this. So in the same way we know that in Mkanyaku there you have got Mhlabea Lingana, Mtubatuba, Josini, and Big Five Hlabisa. The leadership of Afrika Mayibuye Movement must know that in Mhlabea Lingana, which traditional authority is presiding over the people of Mhlabea Lingana. So it's Hosi Tembe who is the chief there, but who else? When you go to Josini, you must know that there is Nkosi Ngube, there is Nkosi Nyao, who is responsible for which areas. When we go to Nkomazi, you must know that there is Mawewe Tribal Authority where the deputy chairperson comes from and is responsible for which section of Nkomazi municipality. So in the same way we understand the demarcation of municipalities, we should also understand who are the tribal authorities in each and every area. We must also understand and know who are the churches and religious institutions that are organizing each and every area in South Africa. Are we together, comrades? So we must not just, so when we ask for reports from you as regional chairpersons, as provincial organizers, deputy organizers, provincial secretaries, spokespersons, chairpersons, everyone. When we say how many wards are in this municipality, you must know how many VDs you must know. But who are the traditional authorities, you must also know that. And which churches are organizing in that area, you must also know that. It's not a difficult thing to ask. So the manner in which we organize ourselves must be much more organic and unique than how these other organizations are organizing themselves. We are not founding a mini ANC or mini MK or mini EFF. We already have identified the problem and crisis that Codesa neglected traditional and royal leadership. Ourselves, we must know the names of the villages in each and every area. Not saying what 1, what 2, what 3. The limitation of just clubbing people into wards is that you will miss a lot of underdevelopment issues that define a lot of villages. This is what the ANC does. They put a chart there and say what 1. I'll give you an example of Collins Chabane where I come from. They say what 1 to what 36. But each ward has got 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 villages. In Collins Chabane there's 36 wards, but there's 198 communities, which are clubbed into 36 wards. So they'll go to Ward 1 and build some tar road of 2 kilometers. And then they say, no, Ward 1 is covered. And in that covered, they've excluded 6 other villages. So in Ward 17, where Mawene's village is, they want to build a ring road in Mpambo village. And then they say, no, Ward 17 is covered. But in Shgaman village, in Mawenesville, which is an informal settlement which was built first as RDP houses, there is nothing that has been done. In Mawenesville village, there's nothing that has ever been done. But they treat it as what. In Mayibuye, we must take and give account of each and every area when we organize ourselves. That is why even our branches must take into account the villages in all the areas where we organize. It must not just be ward-based And majority of the ward-based branches, you find that the leadership comes from one VD. Sometimes the entire leadership even comes from one female. You find that the father is a branch chair, the wife is a branch secretary, the daughter or the son is a branch treasurer. And then part of what has to be done, we need to expand the work of Mayibuye medics. We must invest optimally our resources and energy in growing the Mandahashu Workers Union of South Africa, MAUSA. So, in the items of the provincial leadership, of the regional leadership, you must care to know what is the state of MAUSA in your region. If they've got members and they've got activities and programs, and how we support MAUSA. We should expand the social assistance programs. Everywhere, social assistance programs is not a function of head office only. It must be a standing item in all meetings of the organization of what do we do now? Some of the interventions do not need money. You can discuss and say, what do we do for our community now? In Sidibeng, Bishop Jones. What do we do now which does not need money to uplift our community? And of course, we must expand our political education program to politically conscientize our people, because Thomas Sankara says a soldier without proper ideological and political training is a potential criminal. So we do not want to breed the soldiers who potentially will be criminals because of lack of political education. We also should launch a religious desk, Archbishop of Afrika Mayibuye Movement, representative of all religions and existing in all levels. So there must be a religious desk at all levels of the organization. And we should consolidate the relationship with all the traditional and royal leaders in all the communities where we come from. So what we said earlier, it must not just that you only know who the traditional chiefs and paramount chiefs and headmen are. You must also have a relationship with them and have a program to interact with them. We must build adequate internal media capacity. So we need a solid media capacity and we should have a consistent publication of Mayibuye Journal. And we should build relationships with other progressive forces in the world. And we must prepare to govern South Africa, because that is exactly what we are going to do as Afrika Mayibuye Movement. And then the next section, comrades, which is also in the Constitution, I think when the Constitution is presented, we'll cover that, is the nature of branches. That branches must be involved in work of communities on a constant basis. That they must be organic, they must not just be complaining instruments. There must be instruments of action in all the areas. And then the last section that I'm speaking to now speaks to the type of leadership that we want in Afrika Mayibuye Movement. What are the attributes and features of leaders in Afrika Mayibuye Movement? Number one is that we want leaders with revolutionary commitment. You must be convinced that there's going to be change. You can't want to lead and every time we take a corner you say, this thing is not going to go anywhere. This thing is collapsing. If you are doubting the potential of Afrika Mayibuye Movement, be honest enough and say, I don't want to lead now, I'm busy with something else. One thing that is for sure is that Mayibuye is going to rise into power. And the manner in which the organization is being purposefully shaped is that it will never rely on any of its individual leaders. It will always be a collective effort that guides all of us. The other principle is that you must be disciplined as a person. If you occupy a position of chairperson of the province, of the region, you are chairperson 24/7, even when you are sleeping. Even when you are attending a family gathering. Even when you are together in a closed door with your spouse. You are still the chairperson. Everything else that you do must represent that this is a chairperson. You can't take leave from yourself. Everything else that you do must represent the movement. And everything else that you say and do in private, you must be able to own up in public. I give an example because it's public of, there are certain things that as a leader you can't do. Even if you think it's for your own privacy. There are certain photos you can't take. There are certain videos you can't take. As a leader. You know, there's a guy who was a leader elsewhere. He took a video. Even when he tries to cleanse himself. He recently got a PhD. When he was congratulated for the PhD, people say the video. He can't get out of it. And that is what society knows that person for. The video. They are not interested on what is the topic of his PhD. There are certain things which as a leader you cannot do. Because everything else that you say and everything else that you do, you must be able to own up in public. I think there's a Bible chapter about that, Archbishop, that says everything else that is done in secret will be revealed. It's there in the Bible. That you think you are doing things, it says everything else that is done in secret will show up one day. So as leadership, we must be disciplined as people. The other principle is that we must thoroughly prepare for all the engagements. We must be dedicated to the cause. We must have proper knowledge of protocols. We are going to visit churches. We are going to visit traditional leaders. We are going to visit all sorts of religious institutions. We must know for sure how to refer to the people that we're going to interact with. We give this example every day that not all churches are led by pastors. Some are led by archbishops, some are led by bishops, some are led by apostles, some are led by reverends. Some, there's a hierarchy that there's an archbishop, there's a bishop, there's a pastor, there's a reverend, and then you arrive there, you say, no, I want to talk to Pastor Zondo. And you are about to address his congregation. Already they will never listen to you. We must know the correct, even of traditional leaders. So the titles which are used in where you come from are not applicable to the whole of South Africa. You must know that there is certain references that are used differently. So even if you are from KwaZulu-Natal, you know that in Nkosi so and so, but in the Eastern Cape they say Kumkan. And so and everything else, at least that as a leader of Mayibuye, we must be respectful enough to know the proper protocols and everything else that we do. Also, comrades, there must be confidentiality on things that are kept, which are confidential. We are not going to do those things of taking your phones, and we're not running a secret organization. We're not a secret society. But there are issues that are internal that must be kept internal. You don't, after every meeting, you pick up a phone and call members of other political parties to download everything else that we're discussing. We are not going to tap anyone's phone. We are not going to try to micromanage anyone. There's not going to be running the organization through an iron fist of intimidations and that. But as a self-respecting person, you must know that there are issues that are internal. If we want to communicate, we will communicate those issues. But what is the purpose of picking up a phone and call people and say, no, this is what is happening in the organization? You know, I'll give you a practical example that Sunday World is owned by David Mabilu. I know David Mabilu since I was in the Youth League. And I know the people who run that organization. I was a spokesperson before. So if information is leaked, I know immediately who leaks the information. And who did they call and everything else. But we found people already who were going there to say, the National Convention was postponed because of money and what. I'm like, what is the purpose of that? So there's nothing that we will not be able to know as an organization. But as self-respecting leaders, if you have got a problem with the organization, find an excuse and say, I want to be busy with something else. We will gladly accept that you are busy with something else. And not become a spy. Or become an infiltration. And it's not like there is anything that is going to destroy the organization. Nothing. We are not a secret organization. We are not an underground movement. We are a revolutionary movement that wants to contest political power and remove the ANC from power. And it's not a secret that we want to overthrow the state in its current form. And we're not doing that secretly. Everyone else knows that we want to overthrow the state. And we also want to replace all these fake black political organizations which claim to be revolutionary when they are not. Our politics, our conduct will reveal that these other organizations are not genuine about the struggles of our people. So that is the message that and the reason why we purposefully say let's open some of the sessions is because we want to disable this thing that someone will go say, guess what they're saying about you? Because it's an open revolutionary movement, which is not run through some unexplained secrecy. The other principle that must guide all of us is the principle of collective leadership. and respect of democratic centralism. Collective leadership means that even when you think the decision you are going to take is correct, you must check with the people that you work with. You can't be a provincial chairperson. You take decisions and the secretary of the province is shocked about your decisions. If you have got genuine convictions that the names that you are going to propose for a region are correct names, you must subject them to the collective. And not just write the list and then you submit, and then those that you work with, they do not know anything about that. Those structures that we have constituted are whole structures. They are full structure. So there's a chairperson and deputy chairperson of Mayibuye in the province, and secretary of Mayibuye in the province or in the region. So when there's a chairperson, you can't say, no, I'm the chairperson, this one is my deputy, that one is my secretary. They're not your secretaries and the deputies. Those are secretaries of the organization. And you will realize one day, you will realize that they are not your deputies and secretaries. When you make a mistake and we take a collective decision to remove you, you will realize those people are still there. They won't live with you. That is the spirit of collective leadership that we must, all of us, embrace. Also, we must have the courage to speak in a meeting. I don't understand myself when we discuss issues in the meeting and when we leave. No, President, we wanted to raise some issue with you on the side. We just from a meeting where all of us were supposed to speak. What other issues must come outside? We must speak in the meeting. And we must be meticulous in planning. And we must speak in a convincing and effective way. When you are deployed to go and represent the organization, you must know all the facts and you must go and speak with conviction. Because sometimes people can say, we thought Mayibuye is coming all right, but this one who was speaking there. And comrades, we must also be not nepotistic. Even if your husband or wife is highly capable, it's not your space to suggest that person must lead anywhere. If a person is close to you, even if your child is the best, you can't be the one who proposes that your child must lead the sub-region. Stay away from recommending your family members to leadership responsibilities. Because people are going to say, this is a family affair. And what do we want from leaders? We want leaders who love our people. We will understand what Che Guevara says, that at the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary without this quality of love. So all of us, comrades, must love our people. We must not be pompous. We must not show off anything. We must not sabotage the organization. If the secretary types slowly and you are a deputy secretary, you can type faster. You must type the minutes. And not fold your arms and say, we will see what is going to happen with the next meeting. You must not derive joy over the failure of the people that you serve with. And leadership must not gossip. You must speak openly. You must go to the chairperson that, Chair, you spoke very well, but there are other points that you forgot there. If you had emphasized this, it was going to be better. But if you tell someone else, it says that, is that a chairperson? That one? Did you hear? Then that is gossip. That is gossip. You must go straight to the person and say, you can do better if you do it like this. If you are scared to talk to them, you say, no, Chair, I want to make additional point. I know that issue has passed. But can you please, in the next intervention, improve there and there? Then we shape each other collectively. Instead of going to talk to other people about the leadership that and leadership must not be engaged in violence against women and children. And leadership must not generate conspiracies. And leadership must not tell lies and must not deceive comrades. We must be an organization that tells no lies and does not claim easy victories. All of us comrades are going to be given responsibilities. As part of the outcomes of this engagement, of this NCT, everyone, regional leaders, provincial leaders, will have a certain number of wards and VDs that they are responsible for between now and next year. And we are going to assess the leadership based on what they do in the wards which they are responsible for. We are not going to listen to stories. We are going to listen to progress only as to what is happening in the wards which you are responsible for. That is the only way we are going to build an organization that Now, comrades, we have come to the end of the presentation of the Afrika Mayibuye Restoration Manifesto, and all of us should have the courage to explain and speak to the Restoration Manifesto. From now, all of us, the program which we are going to adopt here will take us to all the provinces, to all the regions, to all the sub-regions. As leaders, we must be able to explain what this Restoration Manifesto is and what we seek to achieve as Afrika Mayibuye Movement. Amanda!